The Spin-off Podcast Network.
Are you making the most of your KiwiSaver investment? Generate is an award-winning KiwiSaver provider with a track record of strong long-term performance. Making a smart decision now could add tens of thousands of dollars by the time you reach retirement. Book a no-obligation chat with a Generate KiwiSaver advisor today at generatekiwisaver.co.nz/get-advice. A copy of the product disclosure statement is available at generatekiwisaver.co.nz. The issuer of the scheme is Generate Investment Management Limited, and of course, past performance does not guarantee future returns.
I'm Toby Manhire, and this is Juggernaut, the story of the Fourth Labour Government, a podcast in 6 parts.
Doesn't give my opponents much time to run up to an election, does it?
This nation is at risk.
What do you think you're up to now, you perverted little liar?
I could smell the uranium on it as you lean towards it.
There's a radical overhaul in the history of New Zealand's administration.
Juggernaut, the story of the Fourth Labour Government, made with the support of New Zealand On Air. Listen now on the Spin-off or wherever you get your podcasts.
You know how like sometimes you get like a sort of a Moorish craving?
Yeah.
And sometimes it's for sort of like delicious palm oil free dairy milk chocolate and you just sort of want to nibble and you want to tell everybody how good it was, and sometimes you just have a sense inside, you're like, oh, there's something missing, something could really top off this night, and it's like, maybe I need to destroy the career of a Greens co-leader again. You know, it gets Moorish. You want you can't stop
Tasty.
with one.
Yeah.
Like,
Tēnā koutou katoa. This has Gone by Lunchtime, an audio cast on the Spin-off with Ben Thomas and Annabelle Lee-Mather. Kia ora koutou.
Kia ora.
Kia
And
ora.
the award-winning Toby Manhire.
Yeah, that's correct.
oh yeah, congratulations, Toby.
You won an award too, didn't you?
Mihi won an award.
Me award. Lots of awards. Tia here is also here.
Morena, folks.
Kia ora.
It's a sunny day. We've been talking about chocolate.
Winter's almost over.
Last day.
Yeah, the winter of discontent almost over. Headed for a spring of discontent.
Today we're going to talk a little about Trevor Mallard saying Slán to him and kia ora to Adrian Rurawhe. The new Tamaki political vehicle, we'll touch on that. We'll have a full reading, from Te Aihe Butler of the latest War and Peace length Facebook entry from Kodav Sharma.
So with Te Aihe's velvet tones, that's just like, that's like an ASMR hypnotic loop.
I don't think that the government could come back from that.
We could just chuck some binaural beats behind it and the entire listenership is just out there.
Are you okay with that? Or would you consider that workplace bullying?
It's only 4,700 words. It won't take long.
I'm not sure the Spin-off is ready for that much internet traffic.
True.
That's a great point.
Yeah, indeed.
Before we get into that, let's talk a bit about the kind of later stuff that is in the headlines, which is cost of living payments, second edition. And this story, there was the cost of living payment we talked about on the podcast, the squeezed middle, the budget, big headline announcement. It was meant to be the thing that, if not a game changer, it was meant to be a tone shifter, a circuit breaker. And it's ended up just kind of adding to the government's woes. We had on Monday, I think it was, the Auditor General. The Auditor General put out a letter criticising the way that it had been rolled out, saying it was haste was put ahead of getting it right. He said that good stewardship of public money requires greater care. And now, Annabelle, we have the National Party calling for an apology, which seems to be like the latest version of the cudgel. The cudgel before was call the cost of living a crisis, and we got that. Now call the cost of living payments something you have to apologise for, you know, and it's sort of just kind of blown back in the face of the Ardern government.
It is interesting, though, how politicians don't like to apologise, eh? For a guy who likes to communicate in highly detailed policy, wonky type kōrero, David Parker seems to be at the centre of a lot of balls ups, right?
Yeah, and you know, look, Parker is at the centre of this because it was decided that it would be done through Inland Revenue, and he's Minister of Revenue. If it had been done through MSD, like the wage subsidy, then I assume, Carmel Sepuloni would be on the hook, or Robertson. So, and Inland Revenue, of course, did warn against them being put in charge of it in the initial regulatory impact statement. They said their system...
Not us, please.
Yeah, they said, we're in charge of collecting taxes. Like, that's what we do. We don't know how to figure out if somebody's,
And as Parker has acknowledged, they wouldn't have been handed it had it not been for the overhaul of the IT systems, which meant that they could break it down a bit more.
Oh, yeah, that's right. So Inland Revenue just is off the back of this huge IT change, which has actually made it much more user-friendly for its sort of core purpose of paying taxes. And Inland Revenue is actually an example of a government department that's really turned itself around in terms of sort of public trust and confidence, which is part of probably why they didn't want to get near this. David Parker basically fell back on this Donald Rumsfeld, there's unknown unknowns. We don't know what we don't know. And that's the unknown, isn't it?
The known unknowns? Are they known unknowns or the unknown unknowns?
You don't know what you don't know.
I don't know.
That's the unknown unknowns.
Is it?
Yeah. And so... Poor old David Parker. But, one thing that I felt was interesting was the Prime Minister, in defending sort of the legitimacy or of the scheme, said that 31,000 people had now opted out of the first payment and wouldn't be getting the second, from the first payment and wouldn't be getting the second payment.
Because they were either in the Himalayas or dead.
Yeah. Well, no, these are people who've opted out.
Oh,
right?
opted out even though they're eligible.
Yeah, so this is... and she said they may even be eligible, but they considered that they weren't eligible.
Yes.
So I mean, who can really look into the tax status of men and come up with the truth? But that's pretty big engagement. If you had 31,000 people engaging with a government public relations campaign, you'd say that was probably a pretty big win. And to have that many people actually contact Inland Revenue over this policy and, check the box or say, I don't want it, I would say that's a lot more people than sort of visit the IRD website every day. And that suggests that, what might otherwise be, a bit of a... You might think of a bit of a foobar, sort of, it's just a bit of a mess-up administrative error. This has gotten big cut-through.
Well, not just that, Annabelle, it's gone to, not as many as they hoped in the first round, but I think it's up to 1.4 million or something people who are receiving this payment in $350 chunks, which is non-trivial for a lot of people. And the second time round, they've introduced these new mechanisms whereby if IRD has any suspicion that you may not be, here you have to tick a box saying you're in New Zealand for tax purposes and tick a box saying you haven't recently written any 4,700-word Facebook posts about the behaviour of parliamentary services. And if you do that, you get your money. And maybe, Parker's line as well is that he reckons it will end up being about 1% that they overpay to. So 1% error, which is pretty small fry in the grand scheme. It's not quite a lot of money, but in the scheme of things, you would say, well, that's not a bad error rate. Are we at danger of overstating this as some kind of snafu, whereas people to whom it makes a difference in the face of very expensive cheese will feel differently?
Well, I totally get why it needed to be, incredibly accessible. Because we know that for vulnerable families or families without a lot of resource, applying for something like this becomes incredibly difficult, and usually the people who need it most don't get to access it. Oh. But equally, I don't see why ticking a box to say whether or not you live in New Zealand would have been particularly difficult to apply in the first instance. Yeah. To be honest, I'm more worried about the people that aren't getting this payment, and I know anecdata-wise, that there are people who are absolutely eligible who haven't received the payment, and getting the payment is difficult. I am not worried about. I think it's a good thing that the government is being questioned and challenged about it. If you look at the way beneficiaries are treated, if they're overpaid, the punitive approach the system takes to people who misuse, public money in terms of, beneficiaries who might overclaim for something or might go overseas for a week and get overpaid or whatever. There's an incredibly punitive approach. So I think that, that the government needs to be held to the same levels of account that ordinary solo mums and stuff get. Disability beneficiaries are held to when it comes to the use of public money.
The broader question, Ben, around, I guess, where the government is at a year out with a range of different policy and legislative programs. I'm thinking the most recent one that has come up in the last sort of 12 hours around the GST on KiwiSaver service fees. David Parker, again, was quite impressive, I thought, on the radio this morning, explaining that really it was closing a loophole and that there were some people who were getting that it should be subject to GST. Whereas the way it came out it wasn't press released as far as I'm aware. I didn't get a press release anyway. And it was sort of identified and then it was ballooned into the multi-billion by 2070 number. And it just, you add to that a bunch of different things, whether it's three waters, shortfalls in the health workforce, block pipes and immigration, even concerns around crime, the Oranga Tamariki bill and the perceptions that by almost everyone except the government that the Children's Commissioner is being muzzled. All of these things, I don't know, we sort of look at the size of the kind of communications industrial complex in the government, and then you just think, how is it that they're always, it seems to be playing into the hands of an opposition in terms of looking like this is being done on the hoof?
Yeah, no, I mean, this is the thing with the inland revenue kind of stuff. They do these sort of very technical proposals where they'll, release a bunch of proposed changes for consultation that will then go out and go through this very rigorous sort of process with a lot of pointy-headed nerds sitting down and offering input before you'll get to the sort of press release stage. But if you are floating something, and particularly, I think Thomas Coughlan is an extremely good journalist with the New Zealand Herald, does a good podcast called On the Tiles. New Zealand's second best political podcast, maybe? I don't know. Maybe. At best, second.
Real Pod's good.
Maybe, yeah, that's true, yeah. But I think it was a little bit mischievous running with the $103 billion tax in the sense that that's the total amount of the tax projected out to 2070. Now, I mean... in budgets we tend to think of increased spending in sort of 4 yearly lumps. And so governments say, we've put $200 million into this, and it's actually $50 million over 4 years. But of course they could extend it out to 2070 and say we've put sort of $30 billion into this. So I think that was a little mischievous there. But yeah, you're right. And also, it is a bit of it's mixed messages, but it's also bad timing. And a cost of living crisis means that you have bad timing pretty much all of the time, because anything that you want to do which increases costs on people, particularly people who are saving for their retirement, their KiwiSaver is going down, right, because of high interest rates as a result of high inflation. When you've got high interest rates, which we've got all around the world because of high inflation all around the world, assets dive, your KiwiSaver goes down, but you're still being charged fees, and now you're going to get GST whacked on those fees, or the full GST whacked on those fees. And so it feels like, you're really battling to get ahead with your savings. Now, put aside that it won't come until 2026, when, ideally the world economy will be on the up if we're not sort of all underwater. But, boat sales might be through the roof and sustaining the economy. But just this perception, the same as the workplace insurance scheme, introduced post sort of COVID, which should be up and running reasonably soon. It's just this perception that sort of, there's plucking the goose, which is this metaphor about taxation, where you basically want to pluck the goose, until it's bare. You pluck the goose without it noticing, and the converse of that is death by 1,000 cuts. So,
the goose.
Either way.
Is the goose dead, or?
I'm just comparing two sayings. I'm not saying the goose is being cut. I'm not saying...
The goose isn't involved.
You're not slashing the goose. You're not like...
just plucking.
You're not some kind of closet sadist.
Okay.
Just sort of...
Who is the goose?
No, it's a goose.
Oh, just a goose.
It's not the goose.
Golden
it's just
goose?
any goose.
Yeah.
It's any goose.
Just
it's a broadly applicable
work-a-day
principle.
Goose.
Yeah.
Any goose you like.
Yeah.
Probably duck as well. You know?
Can I say, I
that's a
feel
segue
like
if you want to move on to
David
Mallard.
Parker is just emanating this vibe at the moment, like he doesn't want Labour to be in government.
I don't get a huge sense that he's excited about being there. He was actually on a podcast with Bernard Hickey, speaking of other good podcasts, talking about his whole kind of review of the tax system and it sounds
incredible.
It's fascinating. It's really interesting, and I think he is somebody who is super smart, a very reasonable person, and is kind of over the bullshit that you have to do politics. And unfortunately, you do. Unfortunately, with something like this, you did need to front foot it. Unfortunately, you did need to find a way to forestall the framing of it. Yes, I know it's boring talking about framings and narratives, but what happened is Christopher Luxon came on the radio this morning and talked about the retirement tax.
That's right, yeah.
A retirement tax by stealth. Now, I think that's disingenuous, but it's probably, in the bear pit of politics, quite a good way of framing it.
I don't know that the issue that a lot of New Zealanders will have with it is that it's essentially a tax on a tax.
Yeah.
You know, KiwiSaver comes directly from your pay, which is tax, and now they're going to tax it again. This is meant to support, New Zealanders at the ends of their life. This is literally hard-earned cash. And yet the government won't have a capital gains tax, which is money that just accrues through no hard work at all, no saving, no nothing. So, I mean, if you really want to piss voters off, this is your surefire way to do it.
Oh, yeah, I mean, I think there's something to that, right, which is that whatever the mechanism that you're using, Parker might call it a loophole because GST is applied for all other professional services. Why not fund management?
Well, the big operators are getting around it, is the way it was explained this morning, quite compellingly.
Yeah, but the thing is, it does add an extra cost, which will be passed through to savers. And with KiwiSaver, what's happened over time is all of these little tweaks have been made that either add or subtract, small amounts each year that are coming in and out, which because of the logic, the $70 billion, $100 billion in 70 years sort of logic of compounding interest and things like that, means that these small tweaks have big effects over the lifetime of your savings. So the government can't just say, oh, this is just like BAU, of course. It will affect savings, which is ultimately what you're trying to
at the margins.
Which is what you're trying to incentivize.
You are tax on the service fee, to be clear, not on the saving.
Sure, but it's all one global amount, right, that's in your account, right? The fees come out of your account. They don't come out of anywhere else. And they come out of your savings and the government contribution and the employer contribution. And, look, there was a report released by whatever the Retirement Commissioner's new name is yesterday saying that, in about 25 years, 40% of retiree, or 40% of over 65s will be renting, as opposed to 20% now, and about 13% 20 years ago. So, that massively changes the dynamic in terms of universal super, which, try renting in Auckland on universal super and still having any kind of quality of life without other income. So, more of the burden is shifting, particularly to those people who aren't going to be able to buy houses, and so they need to invest. KiwiSaver will probably be their primary investment. And if you are, changing that pathway in terms of the growth, small amounts each year, I think they said, it would work out as about kind of 1%, 1% per year. That change, that does change the trajectory of the big lump sum that you get once you're 65. When you're, looking forward to, finding a new place, maybe downsizing from 4 flatmates to 3 to have a bit of privacy in 2048. So I don't think the government can dug it by just saying it's a technical thing.
And I think it's incredibly disingenuous to say that these fees are probably going to be absorbed by, the fund managers, and that, in order to stay competitive, they'll probably absorb these fees so that they can attract new customers. I mean, we only have to look back at history, like the power companies petrol companies, everything else. Nobody absorbs additional costs. They pass it on to customers, and it will be KiwiSaver customers who end up paying for it.
Well, this is why people in the organisations in the financial services like ANZ, BNZ, and Westpac are just struggling so much.
Oh, yeah, so true. Yeah,
because ruthless competition and absorbing overheads has cut their profits.
Profit margins.
I think
so true.
ANZ was less than $2 billion last year. I mean, where's their cost of living payment?
I reckon.
Actually, they probably got it. ANZ Limited probably got it.
The goose is plucked, the duck is cooked, and the mallard is flying to Dublin.
Oh, look at you. You're so clever. No wonder you won an award.
Ben actually trailed that for me a bit earlier, and I got working on it. Another good podcast, I don't know if you know this one, Kim Hill does a podcast.
Oh, yeah, kimhill.co.nz.
Kim Hill does a podcast on the radio on the Saturday morning, and she was speaking to Trevor Mallard. Did you hear this, Belt?
I didn't listen to it, but I did see it on the Saturday morning's podcast, but I didn't.
Okay.
I didn't.
All right.
I listened to it
great?
when you texted me.
And she had Trevor Mallard on there, and she asked him about his political obituaries that were issued, and he said, yeah, well, some of them, blah 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 blah. But then he said, well, tell you what it was the ones he thought were most reasonable was David Farrar and Ben Thomas in the spin-off.
Oh,
which was interesting.
Then Kim Hill sort of spluttered and laughed and said, "Really?" Which I thought was which I didn't think was fair, because I actually did put a lot of effort into trying to sort of portray Trevor's career fairly.
Look at the complexity of the man.
Well, I don't think he's complex. I think he's sort of like those people...
The different sides, maybe.
Yeah, those people described in popular psychology books whose, like, brains are severed in half by a railway accident. And so they have, like, two hemispheres of their brain operating independently, which is, Trevor Mallard, the champion of women in Parliament, a fierce advocate for homosexual law reform in the 80s, a man who wanted to, late in his career, but even early in his career, it's extraordinary maiden speech where he talked about, what now you'd call rape culture and the idea of objectifying women around Parliament as a link to sexual violence and, sort of prevalent attitudes. And so he's had these sort of high ideals the whole way through, at the same time as he's been sort of Dr. Jekyll-ing it up and just being this absolute thug, enforcer, bother boy bully, who's really been merciless, as a sort of political operative and political sort of assassin. And it is interesting, I think, people say that, sort of, F. Scott Fitzgerald said that, adulthood or maturity is being able to hold two separate ideas in your brain at once. And the thing is, I don't think Mallard does. I think one side is completely unaware of the other side. And they just, I think Mallard actually is sort of instructive to Godov Sharma, which is that you can have these sort of high principles, but then part of, at the same time, you've got to do your day job. You can do these things as a hobby on the outside, trying to improve the lot of Parliament for women and, make it a more family-friendly place. But your core job is serving the party. And if your job within that is kicking the shit out of the opposition, that's what you have to do. And that guarantees you a long career. As a senior minister, as Speaker of the House, he'll get a knighthood and a plum diplomatic posting.
Annabelle?
I think that's a pretty good analysis of him, mate. I think he's a guy who wears his heart on his sleeve and, has made Parliament a lot safer place for women, for tamariki. He has these high ideals and, like you say, just like the most ruthless opposition MP and, fucking rip the shit out of things like Aotearoa television and those sorts of things.
He was the Tuku's underwear guy.
Yeah, he,
That set back Māori media like 5 years, right? And, All because of what was actually,
a clothing allowance that he was actually legally entitled to. But, totally ruthless on those things. And like you say, set Māori media back a long time. Equally, Mihi and I ran some workshops for iwi radio journalism over summer, and Trevor made himself available for these young Māori journalists to interview. So just a really complex, interesting guy, incredibly generous on one hand, brutal on the other. But I have enormous respect for the way he's made Parliament a better place for women. I think a lot of the criticism of him during the Parliament occupation, yes, his reactionary personality has got him in trouble over the time at times. But if turning on the sprinklers and playing Barry Manilow is, the worst thing you've done, then I think.
I mean, it's not even close to the worst thing he's done. It doesn't even make the top 100.
But people have been up in arms about it, and I'm like, oh my God, you guys need to go watch Mita's documentary on Bastien.
I mean, I don't think that the criticisms were that it was mean so much as that it was counterproductively provocative.
It both managed to sort of
where the moment needed to be de-escalated. Right?
Yeah, it both lowered the tone and raised the stakes somehow.
As far as his departure as Speaker is concerned, it does feel as though, and I don't think anyone would necessarily agree with this, probably even Trevor Mallard, that it feels like the moment needs Adrian Rurawhe, and his style feels better suited to just kind of letting some of the air out of the place, and even just the fact of a new start. Did anyone catch him in his first week in
I did.
charge?
I kind of think that's a testament to Trevor as well, that, he's like blooded up Adrian. Adrian has to be one of the most experienced new speakers to come in, because he's had like an amazing apprenticeship where he's been given a long rein to really immerse himself in that role. But I mean, it's a really meaningful thing too, given the Ratana Church's long relationship with Labour and their history in New Zealand Parliament. He's the mokopuna of Iriaka and all of those ones. So it seems incredibly befitting. I think he'll do a wonderful job.
His approach seems to be one. He's the kind of principal or whatever it is that's more disappointed than angry, and that carries its own effect. Like I was just watching Question Time this week, and he gave Simeon Brown a telling off, and I don't want to overcook the school analogy, but Simeon looked very much like very, 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 very contrite, and like he didn't want to get attention from Mr. Rurawhe, rather than I feel as though he might have been a bit more bullish in the face of a Mallard.
So Rurawhe has a couple of things in his favour. The first is that, he does have much more sort of this air of kind of dignity around him and the office. We probably haven't seen that since Lockwood Smith, I'd say. And the other thing is that he's actually, a lot of people have said sort of Adrian who, and Adrian Rurawhe is this guy who, for the last few elections, everyone kind of picks him to be knocked off by whoever the Māori Party candidate is in Te Tai Hauru, because he's very low profile. He's not a well-known guy.
Will he go list now? Will he go list? That's the norm for speakers now, isn't it?
Yeah, I think he would, but I don't think that necessarily means giving the seat to the Māori Party. I wouldn't think that Labour would want that at all.
Well, it makes it a much more interesting situation, doesn't it?
Well, it does, but again, that seat has been seen as a weak link for Labour for a long time, but Adrian Rurawhe always brings it home. And he, but
I think Deb is a contender like they haven't had before, and unlike Adrian, she's had a very high profile over this term.
That's Debbie Ngāti-Wapaka,
Debbie Ngāti-Wapaka. So I think she has a very, very strong chance. I mean, she came pretty close last time.
Yeah, that's true.
So I think she has if Adrian's to stand down, I imagine even if, I mean, who knows who Labour will get, but I think she would have a very, very good chance of taking it home this time, in my opinion.
But I just to return to Rurawhe, I think that sort of almost anonymity really actually helps him a lot in the speaker role, and as deputy speaker before, because Mallard, I mean, look, he came in with the best of intentions as speaker, but the thing is, he had three decades of animus,
right,
rivalries and grudges.
That's right,
with
and it goes
people on
both
the other
ways.
side.
You're right.
Yeah.
It's often said that he sort of had his favourites and all that sort of stuff, but it is much the other way. That when people stood up and were being cautioned by him, there was a real enmity there too.
Yeah, absolutely, and that does make it harder to maintain order. It does make it harder to sort of say that you're calling it straight down the line.
Yeah.
David Carter had the same sort of issue. Lockwood Smith definitely had the same issue when he came in, but he just sort of brought such a sort of independence to the role. But he was still criticised, whereas Rurawhe, because he, a lot of National MPs may not have known he existed until he became Deputy Speaker at the beginning of this term. And so he's been able to sort of really style himself as an independent, fair Speaker of the House, and by all reports, he's very popular across the House, and very respected for the job that he's done so far. And I think that will definitely help Labour. They want to take the temperature out of all of these parliamentary confrontations. It doesn't help them when ministers end up sort of hurling abuse and there's sort of disorder in the House. They want to keep it as calm as possible.
I think too, probably endeared himself to the opposition when, one of the first statements he made was that, he wants to change question time so it doesn't just become an opportunity for the government to grandstand and make long speeches about how wonderful they are, which is fair criticism.
Kia ora, I'm Duncan Grieve, founder of The Spinoff. You can help us keep all of The Spinoff's award-winning journalism free for everybody by becoming a member today at thespinoff.co.nz/donate.
Are you curious about how business can be better? I'm Simon Pound, and I host Business is Boring, a podcast where I kōrero with some of the most interesting people in entrepreneurship, commerce, and making things happen. Tune in to Business is Boring every Tuesday, brought to you by the Spinoff Podcast Network in partnership with Spark Business Lab.
Kia ora, I'm Alex Casey, senior writer at The Spinoff. We wouldn't exist without the ongoing support of our generous members. If you're able to, you can make a donation at thespinoff.co.nz/donate.
Speaking of parliamentary theatre, the Freedom and Rights Coalition mounted their, I can't even remember what they were calling it now, but it was, throw the government out, something or other slogan last Wednesday, was it? I was in Wellington and sort of watched some of it, and it never quite reached, it didn't really come close to reaching the heights of some of the previous actions. It was one of those situations where it felt to me, whereas people had underestimated the potential previously, they probably overestimated, and understandably so, because there was a 23-day occupation of the grounds of Parliament, and so it was almost inevitable that it kind of fell slightly short of what some of the predictions had been. It did have that kind of performative court on the steps of Parliament, which stopped short of doing a sentencing, and while that that sort of theatre has been seen on the steps of Parliament at many a protest before. The difference, I guess, with this one is slightly that it's playing into the narratives around the Nuremberg 2.0 stuff. So even if they didn't necessarily talk about hangings or decapitations, it's definitely feeding into some of the more fringe, horrible stuff out there, including the sovereign citizen movement. But as far as the politics of it were concerned, Brian Tamaki of Destiny's Church, the founder of the Freedom and Rights Coalition, used the occasion very much to announce his new Freedoms NZ party, which he said would have 4 component parts, including Hana Tamaki, his wife's Vision NZ, and
good get for the bishop.
is it called the...
Good to snare a secular party like Vision NZ from the last election.
Long negotiations, no doubt, to achieve that. The New Nation Party, where they've already been issuing various messages to their support base who are complaining about them getting into bed with Bishop Tamaki. And then the Outdoors Party, although within a few hours, Sue Gray of the Outdoors Party, who'd recently been visiting Nuremberg, issued a posting saying actually they hadn't agreed to take part yet at all. Is that also going to be a fizzer? How much of a real thing? When we add the numbers together, and if we did look at Tauranga, Annabelle, and the by-election there, you stitch the numbers together, and it's possible that this umbrella party, which is using the kind of alliance template from back in the day, does it stand a chance now, or has the air gone out of this one?
No, I think that the air's gone out of it. And that's the thing, you'd have to stitch them together, and I think that's impossible. I mean, every year, every election, Brian launches a new party, and it's always a fizzer. And actually, the support for Destiny's Church is declining anyway. So I think, it's definitely worth keeping an eye on and being aware of all of these sort of fringe, freaky groups. But I don't think they have if the election was held this time last year, or then possibly, but I think it's a movement whose time has passed, in my view.
As an electoral force, I mean, it can still have an impact, clearly, without necessarily finding a seat in Parliament. Would you go along with that, Ben?
Yeah, I'm a sceptic. I'm a pessimist. If you're a conspiracy theorist who wants to get into Parliament, I'm pessimistic about your chances. I'm an optimist for the common sense of the electorate. There isn't a constituency. We had Billy TK and Jamie Lee Ross at the last election. That was coming out of lockdowns in Auckland. The vaccine mandates really did ratchet up some of the support, both in terms of the depth of feeling from certain quarters and from wider parts of the electorate. We could be going in a green very soon. I literally went to the Woke Cafe a day or two ago, and I was the only person wearing a mask, and then so I took it off because I felt embarrassed and peer pressured. I think that moment has sort of passed.
You remind me. I've been popping in and out of the donations case at the High Court in Auckland lately, which relates to donations to both National and Labour parties. And one of the people involved, there'd been an adjournment because someone was ill, which seems to happen all the time. There was a power cut at one point, but I think it was an adjournment because someone was ill. And anyway, I was standing downstairs, and a figure walked up towards me almost indetectably and said, "I read your article." And I looked around. It was Jamie Lee Ross, who you chat to. But
how's he doing? How's the supplements business?
And he said, "I read your article," and he said, "There's no way they'll do it. There's no way." And he was talking about an article I'd written about the attempts to try and form this party.
Oh yeah.
And he can speak from experience, right? Yes. He said, "Look, they just," and he's right. And a lot of us say it, but he's seen it really close up. That for all the protestations that they will work together in a collected cause, they can't. They can't. They're not. It's just not going to work as a political party. And when you extract that kind of venom of the immediacy of the mandates, and my enemy's enemy is my friend, it's not going to happen. But I just want to stress on that because I think it's really important that just because one says that it's highly unlikely that it can have an impact within Parliament in terms of taking seats doesn't mean it can't have an impact on our politics and on the campaign, as we're seeing to a great extent of the local elections, and that it can be a genuinely
especially
poisonous
when you
impact.
see like some opposition MPs starting to repeat the rhetoric or some of the conspiracy theories, like the replacement theory and those sorts of things. It is.
You're just talking about Simon O'Connor.
You got me. You got me. Oh my God. You got me. You got me.
Some opposition MPs, plural. It's just Simon O'Connor.
Those ideas, you're right. they're making our way into our parliament and they're being, normalised, I guess, to a certain degree. So
I tend to disagree with that. I think that's right.
Do.
Simon O'Connor, does. I mean, he said some weird things in some of those speeches, and I think some of those other MPs, who are now out of Parliament. Matt King was an obvious example. Spent way too much time down the rabbit hole, and I don't detect much, particularly, Christopher Luxon. I think it was a more fertile ground when Judith Collins was the leader. She did sort of...
Simon O'Connor was saying this stuff like last week.
Yeah, no, I know. Simon O'Connor, it's a bad scene. But... I think in terms of the parties themselves, I think some people, for instance, thought ACT would be sort of conduit for that kind of thing, and they stay very staunchly sort of away from it. And there is a question, about that wider sort of thing about there definitely is more of the sort of rhetoric that you heard in sort of 2000 leading up to 2008. About sort of what do they call it? Helengrad. Where the rhetoric is getting more charged from sort of what you would regard as the non-extremist part of the electorate, but probably still the people who are further.
The difference this time, though, is that it is tethered to a really, really appalling global movement, which is linked, I'm not saying at one remove, is linked to the sorts of things that we saw at the Capitol on January 6th, And so I do think that it takes on an extra, I think you're right in terms of that's what happens to some of the rhetoric, but I think it takes on an extra kind of poisonous, dangerous element when it's linked to people who are genuinely promoting insurrection.
Yeah, look, I don't think we certainly shouldn't be ignoring those really fringe, sort of QAnon-y sort of conspiracy types, because that's right. They don't have to get 5% to be a clear and present danger. It only takes one crazy person for something terrible to happen, right? And I would hope that the security services are taking a keen interest in them. Fortunately, they seem to do it all out in the open on Telegram. But
I just got a message that case in the High Court has been adjourned until Monday for closing. All defendants not to give evidence. So there we go. That's quite interesting. What does that mean? Who knows? Anybody got any chocolate endorsements? I want to endorse policy.nz, which has just launched again, the fourth iteration of policy.
Is it fourth?
2017 was in the first general election, so it's the second local election, but tremendously useful. Policy.nz, you can click through on the spin-off. A real kind of muddle blur of local elections, which I won't get into now, but it's a very welcome torch beam through that. Any endorsements from you, Annabelle?
Yeah, I want to endorse Marama Davidson and thank her and her whānau who have made an intergenerational commitment to revitalising te reo Māori and using their influence to always promote our language. So he mihi nui tēnei ki a koe, Marama. It's really disappointing to see what's happened to you this week, especially when I reflect on the number of ministers who openly endorse All Blacks, the Prime Minister talking about her favourite cafes in Point Chev and other things, and it's difficult to understand why this has happened. Nō reira, kia kaha te tuakana.
Once again, Marama Davidson gets in trouble with a C word. Ben, an endorsement from you? Fanta?
No, it's terrible.
Your craft beer? New Zealand's leading craft beer.
I don't know. I was trying to think.
What about Paddles the cat? No, Mittens the cat. Not Paddles. Paddles is the unfortunate RIP. Mittens the cat. There's a statue.
No, but it's not actually going to be made, is it? It's like some Wellington, the Wellington equivalent of concrete playground or whatever is like It has asked if somebody would fund a statue of a cat. And now, of course, no one's going to do that.
Did you read
Except
about you read
maybe
the story
Wellington
though, didn't
Council.
you? Because you're a mittens man. You're Mr. Mittens, and endorsing of mittens.
One thing that people get wrong is that I do not hate Mittens, the cat who lived in Wellington and drank from people's like fucking
Is this
latte
the council
bowls.
cat?
He was the mayor. He was elected mayor, and then like the city council, tweeted out, "Oh, the keys to the city for Mittens," and then it's like it's just.
So to be clear,
the
your loathing of Mittens
is
that it
Wellington,
personifies Wellington.
Right?
And you hate Wellington.
There's nothing wrong with Mittens. I wish no harm on the dumb cat.
Okay.
Like, the problem
Don't be
is a
ableist.
city that is trying to sort of, that wants to create a sense of identity about the fact that a dude with a cat moved there once before he moved out of the city again. It's like, it's like Opanoni, it's like...
Great city. Greatest city in the world.
Like, a little carving of this cat that mysteriously appeared and played with local children, and then one day it was gone. It's like, it's not a sign, it's not a portent, it's not a tohu or a prodigy. It's a fucking cat. Of course it's coming around to lick milk out of the fucking latte bowls if you let it onto the table. There's nothing special about this. Like, the pigeons coming from pigeon cat.
Pull the cord to our hair.
Do you find it hard staying optimistic with all the financial news in the media? I'm Bernard Hickey, and on my podcast, When the Facts Change, I'm here to help you navigate the ever-changing landscape of economics in Aotearoa. So join the conversation every Friday on When the Facts Change, brought to you by the Spin-Off Podcast Network in partnership with KiwiSaver.
Kia ora e te iwi, Te Aihe Butler here, podcast manager at The Spin-Off. If you enjoy listening to our podcasts, consider supporting our mahi by signing up to become a Spin-Off member at thespinoff.co.nz/donate. The Spin-Off Podcast Network.